Hello and welcome everybody to this webinar, From Deals to Cost Distribution, How Libraries Share and Manage the Costs of National Level Transformative Open Access Publishing Agreements. The webinar was co-organized by LIBER and OA 2020. LIBER is the Association of European Research Libraries with about 450 institutional members, and OA 2020 was initiated by the Max Planck Society and is a global initiative which aims to accelerate the transition from scholarly journals from subscription-based models to open access. My name is Olaf Siegert. I work at the ZBW Leibniz Information Center for Economics in Hamburg, Germany, and I am also the co-chair of the LIBER Open Access Working Group. And I have planned the webinar together with Colleen Campbell from OA 2020, who will be the chair of this webinar. But first, some organizational issues before we start. So you might have read it also on the website. The webinar will be recorded or is being recorded and will be made available on the LIBER YouTube channel afterwards. Please keep your microphones muted and add your questions and comments in the chat. So there are quite a few people registered or have registered. So we have more than 250 registrations. So we can keep with the chat. And you can add your comments and questions already during the presentations, but we will answer them collectively in the Q&A at the end of the session. So after the three presentations. And last but not least, please respect the LIBER Code of Conduct and ensure a safe and open atmosphere for everyone. Now, after these housekeeping rules, to the topic of today's webinar. It will present perspective from 3 European countries, Sweden, Germany, and Spain, on how the costs of national OA agreements are being shared, distributed, and governed. The speakers will outline the different approaches and their agreements and will provide practical insights, particularly on 4 different aspects. First, the background and the national context. So that means which key features of the research and library landscape exist in each country, including the history of transformative agreement and their characteristics. Second, the implementation and national rollout of agreements. How do research library engage with national level consortium negotiations, and what are the governance structures behind the consortia? Third, cost distribution and financial management. How are costs distributed among participating institutions? Which elements were used to calculate library contributions? For example, the historic subscription spend or the number of full-time equivalent of each institution or the number of publications from the institutes or the universities? And are there mechanisms in place to smooth or dampen steep increases or decreases in costs for individual institutions, for example, read-only or publication-intensive institutions? And then looking ahead, what are the plans regarding cost management, participation, and agreement design in the years to come? And also what emerging issues or priority, for example, AI clauses or data protections, are being included into the negotiations? So, and after this short introduction, I will now hand over to my colleague, Colleen Campbell, who will chair us through the remaining webinar. Colleen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Olaf. Yes, hello, everyone. I'm Colleen Campbell. Just a brief thank you to LIBER for inviting us to collaborate on this webinar. And I'm really excited to have 3 members of the OA 2020 community as speakers for our session today. And it is my pleasure, therefore, to introduce our first speaker, Niklas Willen from the BIBSAM Consortium in Sweden, who will talk to us about cost distribution for open access publishing up very far north in Sweden. Niklas.
Thank you so much, Colleen. So glad to be here. And this weather in Sweden is for once actually as it is in my background. It's sunny outside today, so we've just moved into spring in Sweden, believe it or not. I'm here to talk about the BIBSAM Consortium price redistribution model. But first, a little bit about myself. I work as a license manager at the National Library of Sweden, the building you can see in the background. And our role is to take care of the BIBSAM Consortium, which is the Swedish Research Library Consortium. I'm just gonna try to start my presentation. Here you go. So As I said, the BIBSAM consortium, we are the Swedish research consortia. It's administrated by the National Library of Sweden, but the consortium is the members themselves, and we consist of 97 members in total. Most of the turnaround is from the academic institutions. So all the universities and university high schools and research libraries in Sweden are part of the BIBSAM consortium. And the institutions themselves are represented on the steering committee, which take all the strategic decisions regarding what kind of agreements we sign and how to move forward. And we've been around we're celebrating 30 years this year. So we've been around for a while, but we moved from being a read-only agreement to be more focused on open access publishing. And at the moment, we have over 60 opt-in agreements. So the institutions can pick the agreements that they want to join themselves. The National Library of Sweden, we handle the invoices and the negotiations with the publishers. So we represent quite a big part of the total expenditure for scientific publishing in Sweden. It's 68%. It's quite a lot. And our agreements publish just over 16,000 open access articles yearly. And the diagram you can see on this slide represents the big publishers that we have agreements with, and the orange and the yellow ones are the agreements that we have publishers with, and these are sized based on the number of articles that is published within these agreements. So, sorry. Going to go back to my presentation. Yeah. So the BIBSAM consortium has gone from being a read consortia to a publish consortia. So we still have read access to these big agreements, but we do now also have publishing. So we included publishing elements in all our journal agreements. So they have both read and publish and are transformative. And it has been quite successful in Sweden because 76% of all peer-reviewed scholarly articles were published with immediate open access in 2024. And as you can see on the graph here, when we've introduced transformative agreements, the number of open access articles skyrocketed. This example is from the American Chemical Society agreement. And when we introduced a transformative agreement in 2020, the number of closed articles plummeted and the open access article skyrocketed. So it changed. So those agreements have helped us to move on to an open access publishing agreement environment only. And it's also that the total value of those read and publish agreements equals the list price of the articles that are published in the agreement. So if we compare the list price of the 16,500 articles with the cost of what they would have cost to publish at list prices, those two prices equal each other. That's a good thing. But when we've moved over to transformative agreements quite fast, and the price models that we use are still quite old. So the price models that we used in those agreements, they are still based on print subscriptions back 20 years ago. So when we started the agreement, for example, with the Elsevier, we based the price model on what you had in your shelves. And the price model hasn't moved along with publishing necessarily. So when we look at the price distribution within the Swedish agreements back in 2022, we saw that there was an unbalanced distribution. As you can see on this graph here, you can see that this is one of our largest agreements that we had. And the bars represent different institutions, and they are sorted on how much they pay for that particular agreement. And you see the dotted gray line is how much they pay in the agreements. So the largest institutions pay a higher sum. Laser. And so on. But if you look at the share of published articles, it's quite unbalanced. And I highlighted 3 different institutions. We see the largest institution here, they have a high publishing rate. They publish 13.6% of the articles in that agreement, but they pay only around 11%. And we have a smaller university here that are paying around 6% of the total agreement value, but they publish around 3.7%. And the gap that we see here is based on that they were a well-stocked print library back in 2000 when the agreement was initiated. So they've kind of been suffering from that since then. And we have a smaller institution here that are paying a smaller amount, but they publish more. And that's because when they've entered into the agreement, they were a university high school, but they've now become a university. So they have more researchers and they publish more. So that's an unbalance that we've been struggling with since we introduced publishing in our agreements. So in order to address this issue, the steering committee of the BIBSAM consortium, they had a report done by a consultancy that were looking into cost distribution and to propose some kind of solution to this. And with the interviews they did with the institutions within the BIBSAM consortium, the institutions wanted a fair price model most of all, not necessarily less price or more price, but a fair price model that correlated with their actual output. So the recommendations were, we had 3 recommendations, but we've looked into what we call a model C recommendation. It was A, B, and C model. And the C model is that they recommended that we do a 10% entry fee that would reflect the institution size and a 90% publishing fee. And this means that if you publish more, then you get to pay more. And it also recommended that we do less. We would do less impact if we apply this model to all agreements all at once. And there's a link there to the presentation, but if you just Google BIBSAM and price redistribution, you will get straight to the correct page. So the model itself, the redistribution models, we've developed that in-house, and that's something that we apply to the agreement. We call it the 90-10 model. And it's basically, we take the total agreement value, divide it into 2 parts. 90% of the value is distributed based on the publishing share in that agreement. And 10% of the fee is distributed based on your institution size, in this case, FTE researchers or FTE staff. So most of the price are dependent on how much you actually publish. And one of the initial responses that we had from publishers and institutions is that, is reading not important anymore? Don't you value reading? Because those agreements include both reading and publishing. But when we compare usage and publishing, so usage correlates better with the number of published articles than the number of your FTE researchers or staff. So even if we balance the agreement that you pay more based on how much you publish, it's still going to correlate better with your actual usage of articles. So, and the importance of the 10% FTE fee is that we have smaller institutions that have no publishing at all, and they still need to pay something. So they have a fee based on their number of FTEs instead. So we've looked into this and we've applied this model to some of our old legacy agreements with big commercial publishers. But not all agreements do need redistributions. A lot of our agreements do have a balanced distribution between publishing and what you're paying today. And we also included the publishers in these discussions because there was some fear from the publishers that applying a redistribution model would scare some institutions away if they get too high price increases. So in order to not scare institutions away, we've also included dampeners in this redistribution. So there's a actual floor price. So there's a minimum fee that you have to pay. So if you publish, if you're a small government institutions with say 50 employees and you have no publishing at all, you still need to pay a minimum fee to get access to the agreement. And there's also can also put limits on how much the price increase and a limit on how much the price decreases every year. And the idea is that if you cut away from how much the prices can increase each year, so say if we cut the price increases at 45% each year, we need to cut away how much the price can decrease every year, so it sums out at 0. So most institutions will get a price change between those limits. So this is a quite, since we have price increases at institution level at say 30 or 40% in this agreement, we needed to have a strong commitment from the steering committee and also a strong commitment from the institutions. So we had the commission studied back in 2019. We developed the model between 21 and 22, and the first implementation we had was with American Chemical Society, but the first really large institution was the Elsevier agreement in 2024. And the implementation was a success because no institution actually canceled the agreement, but we saw a much more fairer price distribution within those agreements. So now in 2026, we have all major agreements are redistributed based on publishing. And on impact level, I mean, something happened with the prices. Some had to pay more and some had to pay less. But the prices are now aligned with publishing output, and the outcome depends, of course, on the agreement because this is applied on agreement level. So it's going to be different price distribution for Wiley and a different price distribution for Springer and Elsevier and so on. But if we're looking at Elsevier agreement and if we compare the top 10 universities and other academic institutions and the non-academic institutions, which are the government agencies, we see that the top 10 universities, they saw quite a minor change in how they pay. Some prices, I think, were redistributed within that group, but they pay roughly the same amount. But the non-academic institutions, they had a price decrease, which is quite hefty, but because it's now based on publishing, those are mostly reading, so they are now paying way less. And the mid-sized academic institutions, they got a price increase because some of them are actually universities nowadays, and they used to be university colleges, so they pay more. And moving forward with this redistribution model that we use, we see that there are some challenges that we have to face. If we plot out the institutions on price balance, if we take the prices here and we take the articles here and just plot out the institutions based on their price and the articles, we see that the large universities, it's quite evenly distributed now. But for the small institutions, what we call the volatility zone, if a small institution goes from, say, publishing 5 articles to 10 articles the next year, the price model that we use will have quite a big effect on their prices. So we have to be a bit careful with smaller institutions, even though it's necessarily not a big amount of actual money, it's going to be a big change in their budgets. So, and also government institutions that have high FTEs and low usage. We have big government institutions with say 2,000 employees where there are only like 5 or 10 employees that are actually interested in reading the scientific materials. That's a challenge to factor in how much FTEs are we actually counting. And there've been some criticism on the negative incentives of if you increase your publishing, you get punished by a higher price increase. It's different from if you have higher usage 1 year for another, 1 year between 1 year and another, there's not going to be a price increase. But if you publish more, you're going to get a higher price increase. But we're not necessarily thinking increased publishing forever is a good thing. So the next step now is if we update, if you use the same model when we are renewing the agreement, or if we're happy with the price balance that we have today. And we also need to review the total impact now that we go into the next round of renewals with the big publishers. And I think that was all the time I had today. So I said say thank you and leave over to Colleen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nicholas. That was really great, especially as an introduction also to the thinking that goes into assessing or developing cost distribution models. Super helpful, thanks. Just really quick, we will get to questions later on, but since we have you here and it's a very clear question, the data you showed in the last graph there, the plot, were those numbers in euro? One of the attendees was asking when you were plotting the price to the number of articles. Do you recall, is that euro or are we looking at Swedish?
I believe this is one of our large agreements. I'm not going to say what agreement. It's one of our largest agreements, so it's euro, definitely.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay. Great, interesting. So just sort of recapping here, we have a cost distribution based on publishing and based on FTE. So those are the two primary indicators that you were looking at. Because I think in other cases, we might hear different factors to be considered in developing cost distribution. So let me move on to our next speaker, Kai Guschun from DEAS, Deal Open Access Services in Germany. Kai, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Colleen. Thank you for inviting me. Let me start from the beginning. So I would like to give you an overview about how DEAL distributes costs within the consortium. Maybe to start with, give you an overview about what the publishing landscape looks like in Germany in general. So Germany publishes in the range of 100,000 publications a year, according to Web of Science. I mean, we all know there are various databases to measure such things. And I guess this is more or less the output which is being published in the international journals. And just as with many countries, you see a distribution of publications that focus mainly on the three big publishers, making out for like nearly the half of the German publishing output is being published with Elsevier, Springer Nature, and Wiley. And roughly Germany represents like 5% of the global output. So that is an important indicator when we talk about the open access transition as such. So can we transform all the journals or all the output, the global output? So Germany is quite, I would say, probably a bigger player within Europe or so, but still, I mean, 5% of the global output, it's not the US, it's not China, but it is something. In our consortium, or not in the consortium also, but in general, we can say that there are more or less 500 or 500 plus institutions which do publish in those journals or in these international journals of the big indexes. And those comprise around 100 universities of applied science. We have quite a lot of publicly funded research performing institutions that belong to the big research organizations such as the Helmholtz Association or Max Planck Society, Fraunhofer. You might have heard of those. And there are also institutions doing research, or also basic research for federal agencies in Germany. Why do we have the DEAL agreements? For those of you who have not heard yet about DEAL, so there was a call already 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, from the University of Leipzig. We all remember, and we still have it, more or less, the serial crisis, that the costs are too high for access to scientific journals. And the former rector of the University of Leipzig, she said that why aren't there actually like nationwide agreements or nationwide negotiations with those big publishers where we need to spend so much money on and nobody has real good access? So there was a public call and was being picked up in a newspaper, and actually, which is still kind of a miracle, because the research and education sector in Germany is very much organized around the federal states and financed by the federal states. So there's not much that can be done centrally in Germany when it comes to research and education. But still, this call was picked up because there was a kind of an informal organization called the Alliance of Research Organizations in Germany, and they had a working group already involved in licensing. And they started to finance a project group called the Project Deal, and they were tasked with sorting out how to approach negotiations with those big three publishers. And actually, then in the end, they also started negotiating with the three publishers, and at the same time, it was one of the objectives then to achieve something substantial for open access with those negotiations, because as you see with the distribution, we thought that it would be good to really not only include the pure OA journals in the agreements, but also hybrid. And there was this new concept of maybe you remember, offsetting agreements, where the strategy was to allocate former subscription budgets around the publication output, or to allocate it on an article level, so not to pay double for open access and access, but to pay only one fee for one article, and then getting the reading access, not on top, but at the same time reading access, and really comprehensive reading access. So that was the strategy. Those three goals were defined by the project, and they negotiated. And actually, the deal consortium was then implemented. So I just make a step forward to the agreements that we have now. We are already in the second phase of the agreements with Wiley and Springer Nature. So those agreements are 5-year agreements. They started in 2024. And we also achieved the first Elsevier agreement in 2024. Maybe you've heard of it, that Germany had quite a long time without any Elsevier agreements at the German institutions, because although it was the first publisher the Project Deal approached, it was not possible to reach or to achieve an agreement with Elsevier in the years before. But finally, in 2024, it happened. And now we have more or less, not for every agreement, but nearly for every agreement, around 500 institutions are participating. And there are lots of more of institutions which are eligible to participate, around 1,000 per agreement. But those 500 are mainly those institutions that actually also have a publishing output with the publishers. And the consortium processes around 38,000 articles per year, meaning hybrid articles and also gold open access articles. And the whole thing, this whole endeavor, is being operated by the company named DEAS. It's just recently, last year, we renamed it former MPDS Services, if you know it, the old name still. Now it's called the Deal Open Access Services GmbH. It's a non-profit organization carried by key research organizations and also institutions in Germany. And this is quite unique for the whole structure of the Deal Consortium and also for the cost distribution model, which I will outline now in the as following. So when we moved from subscription to this open access model with the Deal Consortium, it was required, or it became clear that it's not only enough to just move from subscription to article-based costs, but also the considerations were around how to distribute the costs among the consortium. As you can see, there were so many of those very different institutions comprised in the consortium, all kinds of sizes and also institutional types. So the question was how to distribute the costs among those very different institutions in a fair way, so to speak. So we set up this construction of this two-layer financial model. So on the one hand side, there is which you can see here on the right side of this graphic. There is a contractual arrangement between DEAS as the operating entity with the publishers. Those are those so-called deal agreements, which you can also find online. They are all published, but they function according to according to a different structure as the so-called participation agreements do function. And the participation agreements are being included with each deal institutions that participate in the agreement. So the institutions would never somehow have any kind of contracts or agreements with the publisher directly, but only through the DEAS. And that gives us this kind of unique opportunity to distribute the costs internally in a different way as we would pay the publisher. So the publisher receives from us one fee per article for hybrid and open access gold. But when it comes to the hybrid costs in particular, they are distributed differently among the institutions. And this is being done by some key principles. So all institutions that participated started with a historical subscription spend that they had before the deal agreements with the individual publishers. And we have a system, or in the participation agreements, it is being defined how they gradually move from year by year from those former subscription costs to a publication-based costs, so year by year. And this is also kind of a solidarity approach, because sometimes some institutions, of course, now that have had comparatively high subscription costs, while they would not, while they have not been publishing so much, they remain or keep their money in the system, so to speak, while other institutions that have a high publishing output but low subscription, comparatively low subscription costs before the deals, those institutions are not forced immediately to jump to their subscription-based costs. So that would represent also a risk in their cost structure. And so now with this internal cost distribution model through the DEAS company, it's now possible to really mitigate those risks, and so that they go year by year, gradually approach their real publication-based costs according to the deal par fee when it comes to hybrid. So for gold open access, it's different. The gold open access invoices are being only kind of passed through the DEAS. We just check them, apply the discount. I mean, the publisher applies the consortium discount, and then we just distribute them. And 4 times a year, the institutions get invoices for the gold open access, while for hybrid open access, really they only get like one invoice a year. They pay something in advance, but after one publication year, all those the caps are being applied, and they get the invoice in a different way, not publication based necessarily. The only exception is Elsevier. There we had actually the Elsevier agreement was. Yeah, and I cannot say the Elsevier agreement was cheap, but it was kind of not necessary to apply those transitional mechanisms to the Elsevier agreement. So we started here with a clean publication-based model from the start. And with Wiley, we already did this transition. The transition is already kind of completed. So as with this publication year 2026, all institutions also with Wiley will pay for their publications, their hybrid publications. One fee per article, which we call the paper charge model. So it's already, Wiley's already publication based from this year on. And then there is something in this cost distribution model, which we call the solidarity mechanisms and institutional discounts. That means that some institutions, thankfully, such as, for instance, the ZBW or also the TIB Hanover, they remain their costs or their former subscription costs they had for the publishers in the consortium, and continue to pay their historical payments. And that creates a pool in the consortium that allows us to apply after with the publication year some discounts, and there are some arrangements being made in the participation agreements that make it possible, for instance, to apply those discounts to each and every individual invoice the institution gets. So for the last year hybrid invoices the institution received, we could apply, for instance, that the first hybrid article they published was free for all institutions, and also the minimum participation fee that applies to institutions without any publication output. They are still required to contribute something, but that could have, due to this non-publishing contributors and this pool of extra money we had, and we could reduce this minimum participation fee, and also there was a par fee reduction. So each and every par fee that has been paid in 2024 could afterwards be reduced. So basically all of the institutions got some money back in the end. And this really adds up to some tangible results. So I can tell you that, for instance, 820 articles across all three publishers we could provide them at no costs in the consortium, which adds up to over 2 million of savings for the institutions for the publication year 2024. And also the reduction of the par fee was quite substantial. It could be applied around discounts could be applied around between 223 and 350 euro per article, and we applied this to 25,000 hybrid articles. So it's quite a lot of money that we could retrospectively give back to the institutions, which was of course received very happily, so to speak. So to sum up, there are some key advantages of the cost allocation model of DEAL. First of all, the financial equity and predictability. I think it's really a good way of to gradually transition the costs from the former subscription costs to an article-based publishing scheme, because that, of course, protects some of the bigger institutions against cost shocks, so to speak. and which enables them to still participate in the consortium, although they have those these higher costs and for the consortia, and as such, it gives us much more flexibility also for all those diverse contexts where the institutions came from. I mean, if we see we have really large universities, and then there are some really small institutions where you might not have any publishing output, but still those institutions, due to this model, are able to participate at really kind of low costs. That means that also institutions remain engaged that do not publish, and those discounts mechanisms are really kind of a shared investment in the open access infrastructure for all of the institutions. And it gives us a bit room to maybe also experiment a bit. I will not start to talk now about Diamond, but in the future, I mean, there are some considerations also internally. If we have this system of we can maybe save money, or we can transition money or funnel it from the commercial publishers into Diamond projects. These are all things which can be considered within the DEAL consortium now. But of course, it's kind of complex, so I don't think it's possible. We have like full-time people working at the DIAS for this consortium that handle all those publications and invoicing and so on. And it's also for calculation. It's quite a lot of, it's complex to apply such models, especially for such a big amount of institutions. And another challenge is, of course, liquidity management. So we need to pay publishers in advance, of course, sometimes, or we need to balance what we get from the institutions with our regular payments to the publishers. And it requires lots of data work. Of course, we have a dedicated team that only that's a data team that keeps together all the publishing output data and so on. And these are the future considerations. That it's of course challenging to, for instance, adapt those models to changing publishing scenarios for the future. Now we see that gold open access is growing a lot, and also, of course, long-term sustainability is still something. And still, even though we have this balancing mechanism, or this internal cost distribution, I mean, still there are institutions that are facing like a double or triple of their former costs when it now comes to publishing, and they are still not really able to. I mean, so many institutions in Germany just did not get more money. So even if you distribute it differently, or make this buffer for this challenge, or mitigate the risk with this cost distribution system, it's still, even after some 5 or 6 years, they still don't know where to get the money for these for their extra costs. So this is an ongoing discussion in the consortium. But
thank you.
Basically, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that overview. All right, so we've heard 2 different national contexts in reflecting on how to distribute cost as we shift away from the old investments based on subscriptions and holdings, and thinking about how do we come up with fair models that are, that make this transition sustainable for the libraries, but lead them to a context where their investments are supporting open access and not subscription paywalls. All right, we've got one last speaker, Jamon. If you are ready, I would turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Colleen, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I will try to share my screen. So as I will introduce myself, I'm Ramon Ros. I work at the CSUC. This is the Catalan Consortium for University Services, but today I'm here representing the CRUE. This is Conference of Rectors in Spain, which is the main actor in these transformative agreements we have been working with in the last few years. Just to start and showing you a landscape of the different institutions that have been involved in these agreements. We have the CRUE, which have nearly all universities in Spain. This is 77 universities. In these contracts, not all universities have been involved. It have been around 60 universities, so most of them CRUE have a national coverage. Another important player in these agreements has been the CSIC. This is the National Research Body. They have 121 research institutes, but for the contract, it counts as one institution. So for agreements, each university was counted as one. So it was an agreement with 60 universities plus the CSIC, one more player. We also have, so this is CSIC that covers also all the national landscape. We also have some consortia, not everywhere, but we have the Andalusia Consortium, the Catalan Consortium where I work, the Galician Consortium, the Madroño Consortium in Madrid, the Bucle in Castilla y León, the Bubal in Valencia. They're important players in these agreements because we have to manage a lot of work and a lot of agreements with all our member universities, but we do not have an administrative role in the contract. So the contract is between CRUE and the universities and the editors and CSIC also, not the consortia. Also, we have two big important purchasing groups that are mixed with the consortia. This is the UNIRIS group and the G9 group. They're at the same time as the consortia, they do not play an administrative role in these agreements. So they pay nothing. The invoices go directly to the universities. We have added some research centers, but just a few of them, because there are several research centers in Spain, but in this first phase or first years, we have not involved them in these agreements, basically because they had no subscription license at the time we started the negotiations. In the last round of negotiations, we have included a network of research centers in Catalonia called CERCA. This counts also, this calls also as one institution. We started in 2019 with this document. You can see here, you can download it from the internet. It's called Universities Commitments on Open Science. And basically what they said is a CRUE published document that basically says we should do what they're doing in Europe, you know. So we have to go to transformative agreements. So we spent 1.5 years negotiating with the big players. We started with Elsevier, Wiley, Springer, NATO, and ACS because they were the biggers and we were more ready to go with them. And we signed a contract for 4 years with these 4 players. In Wiley, we had a pilot contract for 1 year and then the contract for 3 years. After that, in 2023, we also reached an agreement for 3 years with IEEE and RSC. And after that, we have had, I call it a second round, with a continuation of these agreements with a different, slightly way of sharing the cost. I will show you afterwards. We have renewed all the agreements. Okay, some of them with less years, 3 years, except with Springer's that it's 3 years, but +1, so it's optional to go more to extend the contract or not. So what were the main goals of these agreements? In the first round, all the universities that had a current contract were involved. So this is not an opt-in agreement. But on the contrary, we went to negotiate as a group, as a big group. We said to the big players, look, we are, let's say, 70 universities. We want to have an agreement. Yes, the 70 universities will be here. This will be a yes or no, but we are all a group. No university will leave the agreement. The problem at the beginning is that we had poor data and provided by the editors. In fact, we started saying, okay, how much do we publish in Springer? We really didn't know. We had to ask them. Okay, so we had to rely on their data. I am not saying that they were fair, I would say, but it's difficult to clean your data and to be sure how much you are publishing, because there's a mix of affiliations and with different institutions. You know, even on the administrative data. So how much are we paying to Wiley? They said, you are paying me this amount, and we sum all the quantities of the universities, and it was not exactly the same. So even the money was not what was difficult to match, you know. And the main drive for the first round was all rectors said, we want to publish the maximum number of open access articles. We want to get the maximum number of APCs because we need to publish open. This is what we have to do. On the second round, we had this nearly the same number of universities, just one university left these agreements, and it was not because they were against the transformative agreements, but more for a budget program. And we have added some new universities. So I would say that the balance with their problems, but the balance for the first round was positive because all the universities said, or nearly all, that we want to renew the agreements. In the second round, we had good internal data because we had the data from the first round. So we knew at this time how much each university was publishing in each agreement, because we have been the ones who have approved each article. So we are sure that this university is publishing this number of articles. The main drive in the second round was, of course, also to maximize the number of open access articles, but we had to keep the costs control, because on the first round, some universities that were very research focused, so they publish a lot. They saw how there was a big increase on the amount they had to pay, because we are very based on the publishing cost, as I will show you afterwards. So the record says, okay, we agree with the transformative agreements. What we cannot increase our budgets. We cannot pay more than what we are paying, and of course the cost of the APC at the end should be always below the price list. Okay, so it was more an economical exchange. The negotiation team on behalf of CRUE and CSIC is led by one of the rectors of one university in CRUE, and as a CSIC representative, I think he's the vice president. And we are a team of 10 people, not from CRUE office, but from the different consortium universities. I'm one of them. And so we have library experience or purchasing experience. Some of them are lawyers. So we are a good mix of, let's say, volunteers who work with this staff. What are the sharing rules of the cost and also the APCs? We have 3 different scenarios. If the editor specifies in their office how much is for reading and how much is for publication, like it was the case of Springer and IEEE, then the reading cost is the same percentage for each university. So if it was 30%, everybody pays 30% on reading. And this is based on historical cost. Like I have seen most of you, it's really difficult to get rid of the historical costs, because if you want to introduce any other indicator, is quite difficult. But in this case, this is the last part of the cost of the agreement. And the publication cost is based on the percentage of publication on the last few years, around 3 years, we more or less, when we get good data. Each institution receives the number of APCs according on how much they pay. In the second case, if the editor does not specify this difference between reading and publication, like it was the case of Elsevier, Wiley, and ACS, we have internally agreed that 20% would be for reading and 80% would be for publishing. And then we go back to scenario number 1, where we apply the same sharing. There is a third case, and that was something new with RSC. Their offers is based on a par fee. So everyone gets a number of APCs, but based on what we published the last few years, and you pay according to this par fee. There's no reading percentage, so there are no historical costs here. In some ways, it's easier, it's more transparent, but at the same time, it's difficult for the universities who publish a lot. I wanted to put here as an example, so maybe it will be easier for me to show you what I mean. I hope it will be easy to follow. Let me see. Okay, let's put 2 examples. If the model where a percentage of reading and publishing is specified, or we specified it. Imagine we have an agreement with an editor with that the overall cost is 1 million euros. If 20% and 80% is for reading and for publishing, then of course reading is 200,000. Okay. This University X, because they are historically his cost is 4%, then he has to pay the 4% of the whole reading cost. So the 4% of 200,000 euros is 8,000 euros. Okay, the other university is the same. This same university, let's say the last 3-year publication is 5% of the overall universities in Spain. The 100% is all the players, universities and CSIC in this case. So they have to pay the 5% of 800,000 euros. This is 40,000 euros. Okay, because they pay that, they get a 50% of 5% of publication, so they get a 5% of the APCs in the agreement. Imagine if we have 400 APCs, they get 20 APCs. The other university, as you see, this university used to pay more on reading, but because they publish much less, they get less number of APCs. The cost of APC is exactly the same for each university. And the overall cost, although the global cost has increased slightly, this first university have to pay more because they are more research intensive, they publish more, and this university sees how their overall cost is reduced because they represent or they publish really a low number of APCs. So this is the model we have been applying for all the editors except Royal Society of Chemistry, where they proposed us this read and publish agreement. In this case, the second case, this is easier because with the same data, with the same amount, and exactly the same data, and the same 2 universities, you get 400 APCs. So if it's only based on publishing, if I publish 5%, I get 20 APCs. I pay every APC at a par fee cost, which is of course higher than only publishing fee. In this case, it's just an example, 2,500 euros. So this is the global cost. Okay, I hope this can be understood. It's not difficult, but of course with 70 universities, and it gets quite more complex. So what about the solidarity that you were commenting, and my colleagues were calling with exactly with the same name? When we move from one model to another model, we are changing the basic business rules, what I say. So in some cases, we have universities that will see how their budget, not the budget, but their costs is increased a lot because they publish a lot, while others, they publish few articles. So during the first round, we agreed to have a maximum increase, like it depends on the agreement, for example, 50%. So for the overall agreement, we only allow an increase of the cost of 50%. Okay, so that means because the overall cost is fixed, other universities that would see how their cost would be reduced is not reduced so much because there's this solidarity. But if you get your cost reduced, so do your APCs. So you do not get maybe enough APCs for to open all your publications. So at the end of the first round, some universities were allowed to publish 100% of what they publish in open access, while other universities, especially big universities and very research-intensive universities, were not able to publish everything on open access. Okay. On the second round, there was not this mechanism of solidarity because we understand that during the first 4 years, we had this solidarity mechanism, so it was enough to change the model. So you get the number of APCs according on what you publish, and because the data we had was quite correct on the second round. Anyway, what happens with the non-used APCs at the end of the agreement or at the end of every year, depending on the editor, we get the money back if we are not using the APCs. This is the case of Springer Nature. So if you have APCs that you are not using, you just keep it for you, because at the end they will give you the money. In some other cases, like IEEE, there is the rollover mechanism. So the APC is not used 1 year, it goes to the next year. So you keep it for you because maybe you will need them. But in some other cases, like Wiley, like Elsevier, for example, the APCs, they get unusable from 1 year to the next year, so they go to waste. So we because our mandate is to publish in open, we said, okay, let's say in October, November, especially December, each university that we see they're not going to use all the APCs, we rebalance to the other universities for free. There's no cost, no administrative paperwork, no nothing. Okay, so we make this balance. What about their publishing universities? As you said, if we apply this rule to universities that publish nothing or nearly nothing, they would pay nothing, okay? Which is questionable. I would say some people say it's no, they have to pay. I'm not so sure, because if you want to change the model, the business, and go to completely open access science and open access journal, then the lecture, the reading should be zero. Okay, but because this is not the case, okay, we applied two options. If there is a percentage of reading, of reading, they pay just for this reading and they pay nothing for a publication. If the agreement, like in RSC, is based on par, then they get a minimum number of APCs, for example, 3 APCs or 5 APCs. They pay for these APCs at a par fee level, okay? And if they do not use it, as it was probably the case, at the end of the year, they gave them for free to other universities. These sharing costs, in some cases, quite complex, but it gets much more complex because, as I have told you, in Spain, there is CRUE, but we are organizing different consortia and groups, and not all consortia have the same internal rules, because some of them we subsidize part of the cost, 10%, 20%, whatever. Some consortia get the invoice, we pay the invoice, and then we make universities pay not 100% of the cost, but maybe a part of the cost. It depends. In some cases, we have one consortia that says, no, for me, each university is a percentage for any kind of product, any kind of service we provide, even it's journals or anything else. So this university for me is a 7% of anything. So they will pay 7% of Elsevier, 7% of Wiley, 7% of ACS, whatever. There are different models and quite out of different formulas. For example, we at the CSUC, we have one formula that we use for the reading part. We have been using for the last few years. and it has worked quite well. I would say that we say 40% is paid for equal parts for each university, 30% is based on FTEs, and 30% is based on the budget of the whole university. This is one formula. Okay, not everybody agrees with it. And finally, have we achieved the original goals? Well, it's true that we publish many more articles. That's for sure. That was the main objective of these agreements. We have kept the overall cost, I would say, with inflations, but we have not increased the cost as they were increasing in the last few years before the agreements, but this is the average, this is a global basis. Of course, some universities have seen how their costs have been increased a lot, especially those who are publishing a lot. And no, we have not transformed the publishing business as we would expecting maybe, okay? There has been an interesting collateral effect for me, and this is that we are much more aware what we do, what we publish, how much we publish, what are the affiliations, the procedures, and this, because we have the dashboards in nearly all editors, this has been a very valuable tool, I would say, for us and for libraries to know what our community is doing and what is our business. Okay. If we go for a third round, what would be the lessons? I would say first is no cost sharing model agrees with everybody's interest. If the global sum at the end have to be zero, it doesn't matter how you share it. Nobody will agree. Okay, so the ones who see how their expenditure increases, they do not like it, and the contrary. Okay. It's important to rely on good and auditable data, because this is the way that universities and all participants in the agreement are happy or have no arguments to go against. You publish this amount of articles, you have approved them, so it's true that you publish this article. And it takes a lot of time to negotiate these agreements, not only with because of the editors, but because our community, we are a big community. There are a lot of discrepancies always, and we need enough time to work on important issues like the right retentions, data protection, OI clauses that were not on the primary focus on our negotiations. The primary focus was price and APCs. So at the end, you have a nearly closed agreement, and then is where somebody says, "Oh, okay, what about right retentions? What about AA clauses?" Maybe then it's too late. And we will have to think about what about non-transformative agreements with other editors like MDPI, Frontiers, or whatever. Because if we are only have agreements with the big ones, what about the smaller ones or other model of agreements? Okay. So thank you. That was all by my side. Open to any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Ramon. Wonderful. I have to, again, thank all of the speakers, because you've given us great insights into the thinking of each of your local research communities. And it's been fascinating to see the 3 different approaches from 3 different regions from across Europe. We do have a few very straightforward questions in the chat that you might want to go ahead and answer through the chat. And I'd like to invite those of you who are on the call listening in, if you have bigger questions, please raise your hand, and Hannah from LIBER and I will try to call on you so you can share your reflections. I will, in the meantime, just go back into the chat. I see there's been some questions about what about open access book publications, if the consortia are looking at that. To my knowledge, none of your consortia have negotiated OA publishing for books as yet, but maybe that could be something happening in the future. There's some question. We have been recording this session, and it will be published on the LIBER YouTube channel. But the question was, are the publishers, how aware are they of the cost distribution mechanisms? Because it seems clear that we have 2 separate levels. We have a consortium agreement with the publisher, and then internally, the consortia with their libraries and institutions, they come up with their own models, yes, to mitigate the risks, to make that all more sustainable and help the institutions transition to a more OA publishing focused investment structure. Right. How do you feel about that? Publishers knowing is it their business? How deeply do they know how you are distributing costs? Anyone?
Yes, yes. In our case, I would say that the editors were not so much interested on how we were sharing the costs internally. They just want to get the overall, the whole amount. We are open to them to discuss it and to show to them. It's as I show it to you what the internal costs distribution is. We can show it to them. In some cases, they have helped us a little bit on or proposed ways to do it, but this has been completely parallel on the negotiations. So our first point was we agree with you on an amount, but the internal distribution costs is 100% on our side. You have nothing to say here, and it has worked well.
Yeah. And I would say that's pretty much the same as we work the BIBSAM consortium, that the internal redistribution model is internal, but we keep the publishers informed on how we distribute. And we had a few discussions with the publishers where we do the redistribution. If an institution gets a 25% price increase 1 year because of the model, the publishers have been a bit hesitant and fearing that institutions would opt out. And the question then has been, if an institution wants to opt out because of the price model, which price should we deduct from the total fee? Should we deduct the redistributed price or the price that they were paying in the beginning? So in some cases, we've had a redistribution model, but a different price list of what value each institution represent if they would choose to opt out of the agreement. So, but we never had that situation, because if someone were to opt out, we had to make a redistribution again, since we're dealing with big publishers and we only have, we negotiate one big price, especially with the old legacy publishers. We have one price that we're negotiating. So.
Thank you. Hi, anything to add?
Yeah, so my feeling is that they are glad that they don't have to deal with this shit. No, I don't know. We're not discussing any details with the publishers, of course. I mean, but we're still kind of open because there's lots of information on our website, and we need to communicate this to the institutions. But as far as I know, there weren't any major concerns or something. Of course, there's some interest, but yeah.
Right. Thank you.
It's still a benefit, I guess, that we are the one point stop for the publishers, and otherwise they would need to conclude separate agreements. And I mean, that's the objective of the consortium, isn't it?
Right. No, indeed. I think what your presentations have highlighted is a lot of benefit in having the consortium as an entity between the institutions and the publishers, to be able to provide those kinds of benefits. I'm going to pick up on one of the comments in the chat and also build on what you referenced, Ramon. One of these, like one of the effects of negotiating these transformative agreements is that awareness and that visibility and transparency around how much is being spent, how much is published, which I think was, precisely one of the benefits of, or one of the purposes of having these so-called transformative agreements, right? It's getting that transparency. The question specifically was, how do you work with publishers that don't have dashboards like RSC, but maybe this is just an open comment to all of you. How happy we have a lot more visibility, a lot more insight, dashboards. What more work needs to be done in terms of transparency around publication data, spending or investment levels, and beyond? So very specifically, to start off that, how do you work with publishers that don't have dashboards like RSC? How do we handle that data? Ramon.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Because when we speak with RSC, we say, okay, we need a dashboard, especially in the second agreement, you still do not have a dashboard. And they say, no, the others do not ask me for a dashboard. Spain is the only one who asked for a dashboard. So is that so? Okay, I don't know.
Okay.
In this case, it's quite easy for us because we publish 100%. The number of APCs we get and the number of articles we publish is quite similar. So we cover 100%. We are not happy because they are the ones who approve the articles, and maybe they are approving some articles that we would not approve because it's not completely clear that this researcher is from one of our universities. In some cases, they have miscalculated the number of APCs, so they have spent one more APCs, but they discount us these APCs. So if it's their fault, then they do not charge us this APC. But having a dashboard is important to get this awareness of what you are doing.
Thank you. Any of my other speakers want to comment on the level of transparency or quality of data, whether that's through dashboards or other tools? How satisfied are you? What progress has been made? Where do we need more progress? Kai or Nicholas? Anything to add? Go ahead, Nicholas.
Well, at BIBSOM, the typical BIBSOM agreement has no cap on the number of articles that you can publish in a year. So for RSC, for example, we have unlimited publishing, or the publishers don't want to say that, they want to say 100%, or we cover everything. So we don't have a need to keep track on each article every month, just not to run out of articles. So there's not that need of transparency, but we need to have article data by the end of the year, at least, to set the new prices.
Yeah, thank you. Kai, anything further to add? Okay, thanks. In that case, I will move on. There was another question in the chat raising, what about working across consortia? Has there been any thinking within your own research communities about potentially collaborating across national borders for increased leverage in a negotiation? Anyone thinking about that? I'm seeing that Ramon nod. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so in fact, we are now collaborating with each other, just sharing information, which is so important. We have been doing so in the last few years. We have a small group called CEL, South European Library Link, which is the consortium from the south of Europe. We exchange a lot of information, and we are happy to help each other. Now I see that Adeline from Cooperen says that they also are asking for a dashboard from RSC, so this is important for us to know. But at the same time, this is a contract at the end, and it's an administrative contract. You get something and you pay something, and there is the national law on the public contracts. So it's not so easy to do it with different countries all together, because there's a complexity big complexity, for example, on the VAT, on these contracts, on the invoices. I have seen here that I think it's a deal that you pay the invoices, and then after some months, I guess you get an invoice to each university, so you have a liquid problem here. During the meantime, it's not our case. In our cases, it's the editor who sent the invoice directly to the universities. So CRUE pays nothing. They sit just in the middle. They sign the umbrella agreement, but there is one agreement for each university. Okay, so there are a lot of administrative staff here in the middle, which makes it difficult to do it on more than one country altogether.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from anyone on that?
Yeah, I would also think that the deal agreements as they are now, I mean, you can only maybe speak a bit about that. I would not think that think that that is at the moment, as they are, like scalable for for all of Europe, because Ramon, you also mentioned like tax issues, and if we see how many very nitty-gritty aspects there have been involved also with setting up those participation agreements and so on. But on the other hand, I mean, the idea as such is really a cool idea. So perhaps in the future, when agreements would get more simpler, or the model gets more standardized or whatsoever, why not?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm noting in the chat, I'm just saying we are 20 minutes. We think we maybe have, say, 5 or 6 minutes left before we have to wrap up. And I'm looking at Olaf on that as well. So there's another, I think, some fundamental questions or kind of rhetorical questions, potentially, I'm not quite sure, around fairness. And so I would like to, as I read through these questions, I would like my speakers to think a moment about the notion of what is fair in terms of paying for open access publishing services, and how much institutions pay or may not pay. And so I'm just, is it fair to pay nothing for getting access to around 80% of paywalled articles in hybrid journals? So I'm thinking this refers to your within the consortium where there are institutions that are not publishing and therefore maybe not contributing financially, although we did hear some interesting examples of institutions that have chosen to contribute financially to the agreements to make them more sustainable or to bring benefits to the broader community. Is it fair to pay for fully APC for open access while other institutions worldwide continue to pay the same subscriptions? Even though the percentages of openness in the scholarly journals, might vary. I think we here with reference 20%, but I'm not sure what that's, how much. Yeah, that's a global figure, I think. And does it make sense to strive for 100% article-based fees for hybrid journals with only moderate OA coverage? So again, I think that refers to within your consortium and how that relates globally to the publisher profile. I don't know, anyone want to tackle the notion of fairness within your own consortium, and who pays what, and how that might relate to a global system and the publisher's full portfolio? What are your thoughts on that? Anyone want to tackle that?
This is a difficult question, huh?
Yeah, sure.
But or maybe sometimes it's a personal question, because fairness, it depends on who you ask. They say it's not fair to pay more than 1,000 euros to publish an article that I have made it, and that my university have put the means to make this article. We should pay nothing or nearly nothing. But the truth is that we were paying millions of euros to these editors before the transformative agreement. So we were paying this amount only for reading articles. So at least now we are paying nearly the same on a global basis, nearly the same, and we are reading all the articles, and we are publishing in an open way a lot of articles. At least there's one situation or one aspect of this whole business that it has improved, I would say. When we were paying just for subscribing, we were paying an amount and we didn't know why. We were paying this amount. Why? I don't know. In Spain, there are 70 universities. All of them were paying different amount. The small ones were paying twice the big ones, or the contrary. We never knew. With these new models, especially if the publication percentage is a huge part of that, we know why they're paying this amount, and they know what they're paying this amount. And when they are approving one article, they know it would count as an approved for the next agreements. Okay, so the situation is much more clear now than it was before.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Nicholas and Kai, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned in the presentation that the APC list price value of the articles that we publish within the BIBSAM consortium equals the amount of the fee that we pay to those agreements, or we're essentially paying for just publishing. But as we've seen, the hybrid model is not sustainable, and it's proven to be very profitable for the big publishers. So, and that's why and that's a different discussion. But the BIBSAM consortium has an action plan that we are planning to leave the hybrid agreements altogether and just sign agreements for publishing in Gold Open Access journals. So that's what we're doing right now, because we don't see the hybrid model as a sustainable model.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. And Kai?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, maybe I always wonder when with this question about fairness comes up when it comes to publicly funded institutions. So at least for the German consortium, I would say yes, there are discussions. Of course, it's hard maybe from some institutions that now see an increase in costs, that we all of a sudden kind of introduce this another allocation of the costs so that they need to pay more. But on the other hand, I mean, they are all publicly funded, even if it's if there are several federal states maybe involved and so on. So therefore, I always ask myself, wasn't that the idea of open access, that everyone can read it, even those who did not pay for it somehow? So I sometimes don't understand why the fairness discussion again and again is popping up in the context of yeah, trying to enable more open access. So that's one thing, and the other thing also I would agree with Ramon, and it's a different discussion to discuss the overall amount of money going to publishers and the overall system of commercial publishers, and the discussion around how much may an article costs and the production of an article and so on, because I think that needs to be separated from the discussion around how effective are transformative agreements, and in their and what they have achieved in terms of also of transparency and getting more open access. So that's a different discussion for me.
Thank you. I think we are right at time. So I want to thank all three of the speakers, Nicholas, Kai, and Ramon, very much for taking the time to share so much insight from your corners of the world with us. And I will hand things back over to Olaf.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Colleen. Thanks, everybody, for all the presentations and all participants. Yeah, for all your good questions and comments. And yeah, thanks for joining. And I would say we are really on time. And I say goodbye to everyone and see you again for another webinar or another event. So goodbye.